All right, main speaker, the hammer spot here. Once again, hopefully you saw her yesterday. Our last speaker is my colleague at Heartland, Linnea Lueken. She is a research fellow with the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy. She came to Heartland from the University of Wyoming in 2018, where she graduated with in 2018 with a BS in petroleum engineering and a minor in geology. And before coming to Heartland, she was actually an intern with Heartland, then left us and went out to the real world and worked in the Gulf of Mexico on some deep water drill ships as a logging geologist, and then she came back to us. So she's here to wrap it up for us today. So we'll give it up for Linnea Lueken.
Hi, thank you. So today, I'm going to get into this kind of quick. So today I am talking about biofuels. And specifically, I'm going to be discussing ethanol, biodiesel, and pelletized biomass fuel used for electricity generation. I am not talking about a vegetable oil-powered survival apocalypse truck. I am not talking about ethanol for human consumption. And I am not going after your Traeger grill. Biomass sometimes can refer to biofuels like ethanol and biodiesel, but to keep it simple today, biomass is going to refer to the pelletized solid wood or waste products fuel, and biofuels is going to refer to ethanol and biodiesel. So quick rundown on these. Ethanol is a simple alcohol that is made from corn, soybeans, other agricultural products. Biodiesel is usually made from some kind of a vegetable oil or palm oil, but in the United States, it's usually made from soybean oil. Both of these are blended into either gasoline or diesel in the United States and in other countries. The blends are different depending on where you live, but in the United States, you're usually not supposed to go above about 15% ethanol in gasoline. Other countries have 100% ethanol available at the pumps. That would be someplace like Brazil. And E85 is common in Europe and also in some performance motorsports. So why do we use these fuels in the first place? To begin, the US started looking for alternatives to gasoline after the 1973 oil embargo. They needed another source to try to prevent the chaos that occurred with that. But since the United States can be pretty much oil independent now, it's not such a good reason anymore. Ethanol and biodiesel have a better cetane and octane rating than straight gasoline or diesel, and this is going to be a measure of the compressibility of the fuel before ignition. The main reason that these are blended in reality is because they claim that it has some kind of a climate benefit or an environmental benefit, but as I'm going to show you, it's not quite so simple as that. Ethanol also stood as an alternative to a previous octane booster called methyl tert butyl ether, which was banned because of some groundwater concerns in several different states, and eventually it was banned pretty much everywhere. And then in 2005, Congress passed the Renewable Fuel Standard Program as part of the Energy Policy Act. And this, in the United States, as with many countries that have similar programs, requires the increasing use of biofuels as a percentage of your vehicle fuel and also as your electricity production. So you can see on the chart here, it's really pretty interesting to see how quickly things change in terms of the percentage of fuel ethanol and gasoline. Around 2002, that MBTE is banned, and you can see the acceleration there, and it really takes off around 2005. So let's see exactly why and what this stuff is doing in your gas tank. So specifically for biofuels, it's vital to note that they have a lower energy density than their oil-based counterparts. These numbers are going to vary from one fuel to the next, but in general, gasoline has a higher energy density at about 30 megajoules per liter, and diesel has up to 40. And these can change from fuel to fuel, but this is generally true. It takes 1.5 times more fuel to drive the same distance on ethanol as it does with gasoline. The effect is that biofuel will result in sometimes noticeable reductions in fuel economy, and it'll have an impact on the carbon dioxide emissions too when you start factoring that in. Just wait, because they do claim that you have significant carbon dioxide emission reductions from using ethanol, but that is not actually the case. There's also the potential for corrosion in parts of certain engines, especially in boats and small engines that are not built to handle ethanol fuels. That would be like weed whackers and lawnmowers. This isn't as severe a problem as it used to be, but it still can cause some issues for rubber parts. And then for biodiesel, gelling is an interesting phenomena that if you drive a diesel vehicle, you get to potentially, but hopefully not often, experience. Diesel will start to form ice crystals at a pretty low temperature, so it's going to be around 5 to -2 degrees Fahrenheit, which can clog up your lines. Biodiesel gels much more quickly. With a poor quality biodiesel, you can start having ice crystal formation at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. For most ones that they're going to use and mix into your gas or into your diesel at the pump, it's more like 14 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's still significantly higher temperature than regular diesel. So that's why you have a blend change in northern states in the winter. It's recommended that if you are traveling from south to north during a cold snap, that you stop more frequently to fill up as you travel north so that you can gain the benefit of those fuel additives that are in greater quantities the further north you go. These are usually petroleum-based additives, but they don't exactly talk about that. This and the corrosion problem can also be an issue for pipelines, which is why the U.S. Department of Transportation advises that you do not ship all that much ethanol or biodiesel via pipeline. It can shorten their lifespan. But maybe we don't really care about all that because we're worried about emissions, supposedly, and this stuff is supposed to help us with that. But that's not quite the case. So when it comes to emissions data, at first glance, it does appear that you have some carbon dioxide savings with ethanol over gasoline. Gasoline emits about 3.3 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of fuel burned, and ethanol emits about 1.91. However, when you take into account the different energy output of the two fuels, ethanol emissions actually come out higher than gasoline per energy output equivalent. Additionally, some studies by various organizations, including one by researchers at the University of Michigan, found that burning biofuels isn't actually even carbon neutral. The uptake of CO2 by planting and growing the feedstock is not nearly enough to overcome the emissions from producing and burning the fuel. Besides carbon dioxide, the EPA has even admitted that these fuels increase nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, ozone, and sulfur oxides in the areas that it is heavily used. Higher ethanol use has also been connected to higher asthma rates in places like Los Angeles and near-ground ozone smog in Brazil. And on land, despite the fact that the corn that we grow for ethanol in the United States is not the same as the corn that you eat, it still has an impact on food prices. A University of Wisconsin-Madison study found that the renewable fuel standards and the associated farming incentives caused farmers to switch to more crops that you can use for ethanol or biodiesel production. And so corn prices overall ended up rising 30%, and overall crop prices rose 20% after the passage of those bills. In Brazil, environmental scientists are increasingly concerned about encroachment on wetlands for sugarcane production. While sugarcane production might not necessarily be pushing into the forests, they are displacing rangeland for cattle, which are displacing some natural forest. And this is a picture of land being prepared for a palm oil plantation in Thailand. So to say that there isn't any deforestation going on with some of these biofuels is not quite correct. Biomass. This is a fun one, especially if you are living in the United Kingdom. Biomass pellets used for grid-scale electricity are also not super great, and they share a lot of the same issues as biofuels. Supposedly growing these tree plantations and then cutting them down and shipping them across the ocean and then burning them in a power plant is carbon neutral, but I am skeptical. And a lot of environmentalists are becoming skeptical as well. As a major electricity provider, wood pellets are not particularly energy efficient. They provide about 5% of our total primary energy use. The chart to the right here, is going to show some of our biomass energy consumption since about 1950. And as you can see, the one that they like to talk about all the time is the use of waste, and that's actually flatlined for quite some time. Biofuels have increased pretty well, and the wood biopellet has, for the United States, pretty much flatlined as well. Good quality wood pellets with a very low moisture content only have about half the energy density as a equivalent volume of low quality house coal. A good quality anthracite has more than 3 times as much energy density. So with that low energy density, does it at least save us on some emissions? This is actually incredibly hotly debated right now. I think that so far the data is indicating that it is not the case that it saves on emissions. The EPA and the European Commission for a long time have not held biomass-fired power plants to the same standards that they hold something like a coal-fired power plant. So they don't track the carbon dioxide emissions because there is the assumption that it is net zero anyway. CO2 uptake in reality is going to depend on the type of tree that you plant, and also the underbrush that exists and how long those trees are left to grow. In the American South, where most biomass is grown, the tree species tend to be fast-growing pines. However, they're not always left all that long in the first place, so they're not able to reach their maximum carbon storage capacity anyway. One study actually by the environmental research letters found that replacing coal with wood bioenergy would actually increase immediate emissions, and that governments are actually making a huge mistake with their accounting on this because they ignore the decades to centuries long increases before any meaningful sequestration can take place. If it's true, and I don't think it is, but if it is true that carbon dioxide emissions are causing rapid emergency levels of, climate change, then this is time that we just don't have. So why would we promote biomass? They also found that the production facilities that produce the pellets themselves and also power plants associated with them, similarly to ethanol and biodiesel, produce a large amount of criteria pollutants that are overlooked because of the assumption that it's a green fuel. And this is a big heap of biomass outside of the Drax power station in the UK. You're not really supposed to leave it out in the humidity, so I'm not sure what they're doing there. But this power plant has come under fire recently because the governments are beginning to become a little bit skeptical of the carbon dioxide emissions reporting from that station. Again, land use is a major issue here. Most of the feedstock in the United States comes from what the Energy Information Administration refers to as other residuals. And this is just stuff like leftover bark, logging leftovers, wood chips, post-consumer waste, extra sawboards that you don't need, that kind of thing. Wood from trees with defects that can't be used for anything else. The second largest comes from sawmill residuals, so sawdust. And then the third, though, is what's classified as roundwood or pulpwood. These are trees that are grown specifically for the production of biomass. These displace natural forest, which, as I explained earlier, has actually been shown to be a better carbon sink than the plantation trees that they're replacing it with. Ecosystem disruption is made worse with this kind of tree farming, and because of the EU's own renewable fuel standard goals, and the demand for biomass growing so rapidly because it's supposed to be carbon neutral, it's led to deforestation rising 49% in Sweden, Finland, and across several Baltic nations. So I just spent a good amount of time being super mean to biomass and biofuels. So are they utterly worthless? I would argue no. As we have heard a couple times during this conference, it's important that we do a cost-benefit analysis. We look at what we value and how best to achieve that. Right off the bat, waste products like leftover sawmill residuals, scraps from timber harvesting, bad trees, municipal waste are, in my opinion, a pretty good thing to use for energy. For instance, Japan gets a large amount of their electricity from burning garbage, actually. It's reported that they burn about 50% of their plastic waste for electricity. Is this carbon neutral? Probably not, but it makes sense because it fixes another environmental problem that a place as small as Japan that has as high of a consumption rate as Japan has, and that is waste piling up and potentially ending up in the oceans or in their natural reserves. So this solves that problem for them. And it makes sense to not be wasteful when you have a bunch of stuff sitting around that you could be using for electricity. We need the timber industry, regardless. We need paper goods. We need wood. So it makes sense to use their leftover scraps as well. I'm not overly worried about carbon dioxide emissions, but if you are, these energy sources are obviously not doing you any favors. If you're worried about stuff like deforestation or the degradation of wetlands, it's also not helping you out all that much. If you hate synthetic fertilizers, well, imagine how much synthetic fertilizer it takes to produce the amount of corn or soybeans or other agricultural products that we need to just produce ethanol or biodiesel without even including the elements that we still need left over for food production, right? So we're using up a ton of land and a ton of our fertilizers just for fuel, and those fertilizers are made with stuff that we could also be using for fuel. So in the end, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense economically or environmentally. As I mentioned at the beginning, ethanol fuels are beloved in motorsports, though those aren't what I would call carbon neutral either. And some people get terrific use and joy out of converting their vehicles to run on cooking oil. That's super cool, and I would never be against doing neat engineering projects like that. But there's really no need to mandate this stuff, especially not in the name of being green or environmentally friendly. So this presentation that I have been giving, and these are a couple of articles that show that the biomass and biofuel is even slowly becoming a little bit unpopular on the green side. So I wrote a couple of papers on this subject, both for the energy side and the environmental side, and they're available on Heartland's website. I also did a video on this. They go into a little bit more detail than I thought I would have time for in this presentation, but I think we are good. Oh, I have a couple more minutes? Okay, neat. So I can talk about, I have a minute. I can talk about one of the most fun facts about this. Let me see if I can go back to the slide that has it. If I don't waste all my time just trying to click through this thing. So, if I can find it. Okay, so one of the interesting facts is that the European Union is actually the largest combined producer of wood pellets. About 46% of them are produced over there. But the United Kingdom is by far the world's largest consumer of biomass fuel pellets. They use up 21% of all of the wood fuel pellets that are produced on their own from electricity production. And 75% of that supply comes from the United States. It doesn't even mostly come from Europe. So I mean, do the math on that, on that transportation logistics there, and I'm extremely skeptical that it's carbon neutral. Additionally, it's funny when the British government is using all of this biomass fuel, saying that it's more environmentally friendly, and yet they're also trying to pass rules that restrict people's personal ability to use wood stoves in their own homes. So I found that ironic and kind of fun in a terrible dystopian sort of way. So, but that's what I've got today. So thank you.